Oh no, watch out. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, played by Peter Parker, played by Tobey Maguire. That's not an old lady. That's the Green Goblin, played by Norman Osborn, played by Willem Dafoe. You're falling right into a trap.
Woogity boo!
Jesus. Well, it's that time of year again. If we're watching scary movies, it must mean one thing. It is Halloween time. Let me take this thing off. I can't breathe. All right, much better. So, as a degenerate millennial, Halloween is steadily becoming one of my favorite holidays. The crisp fall air, the candy, the costumes, the music, just the general vibes. It's so fun, and also, it's the best holiday where I don't need to spend a bunch of my own money or travel. And because Halloween is becoming such a fun thing for me, I decided to share it with you guys. But there's one big fat problem. I'm a gun channel. So for today's video, I decided to leap headfirst into my big barrel of ideas and start absolutely scraping the bottom of it. And for that reason, I've decided to present you all today with a list. Yeah, I know. Excuse me, I'm just trying to grasp at some straws back here. So I'm going to be talking about guns from my personal collection that may have dark or spooky backstories, or maybe guns that just straight up scare the shit out of me for one reason or the other. Whether it be fear of handling, fear of shooting, or anything like that. Even legal scares, which yes, that will be a discussion today, sadly. So let's get started, shall we?
Show me that booty hole, Spider-Man. Oh boy, okay.
I see, this must be the extended edition. As am I. The first gun on this list is my Japanese Type 14 Nambu. This is a pistol that was used by the Japanese Armed Forces from 1926 until the end of World War II, in official capacities, of course. It may have continued service further from that point. There's a lot of people out there who think the Type 14 takes design cues from the German Luger, which I can totally understand that since they look so similar. However, the Type 14 actually takes much more design cues from the Mauser C96 broom handle. It was nicknamed the pea shooter by Americans due to the lack of stopping power that these pistols had, especially for their size, and also possibly because of the long, skinny barrel representing a pea shooter. These pistols were chambered in 8mm. Whoa, my God! Times were different, what can I say? Anyway, 8x22 Nambu, or just 8mm Nambu. 8mm Nambu is actually a bottlenecked cartridge that looks like it could actually do a decent amount of damage, something like a 7.62 Tokarev or 357 SIG, but actually it's on par with a 32 ACP as far as its power factor goes, so it's a pretty weak pistol, especially for its size. On top of the weak power this thing puts out, it's also considered to be a very unreliable handgun when it comes to simply functioning. It's not going to blow up in your face or anything, but you definitely don't want to get caught with your pants down if you have one of these strapped to your belt. And from the story I heard about this thing and how it actually got into the United States in the first place, it's very indicative of the fact that it's not a very effective self-defense weapon. So this pistol actually belonged to a friend of my grandfather, and the story I was told was his father was a Marine fighting in the Philippines during World War II, and during his combat tour, somewhere along the line, he came across a Japanese officer, assumingly gave him a double dose of 30-06 and took the pistol off of him while he was still warm. Not only did he take the handgun home with him, he actually just took the whole damn holster off of the officer and its contents. Inside this holster, there's a spare magazine, a lanyard loop, a cleaning rod, and there's also supposed to be a spare firing pin positioned in this pocket right here. But Type 14 Nambus are notorious for breaking firing pins, so it was either used at some point, but most likely it fell out. But what's even more interesting and kind of a creepy little personalization here is on the inside of the lid, the officer's name is written in kanji. But unfortunately, that's not a language I can read because I just got good at speaking English. That's right, I got good. So I have a hard enough time grasping English enough as it is, so I had a friend of mine who's pretty well versed in reading Japanese and kanji look at it, and he said that, yep, that's definitely the guy's name, and the direct translation is kind of up in the air, but he has a good idea of what the guy's name was. But if you have the ability to read kanji, whether you're of Japanese descent or you're just an American weeaboo, I would greatly appreciate if you could tell me 100% what this says. So as far as being a dark and spooky gun, it's got something going here. Once again, we're kind of grasping at straws, but either way, if I was a Japanese officer in World War II and just some American Joe Schmo blasted me away with a 30-06 and took one of my only status symbols off my fresh corpse, I'd be pretty pissed about it. And if you're one to believe in ghastly ghouls, ghosts, and spirits, I would definitely attach a piece of my poltergeist onto this bad boy if I had the option. So as far as spooky factor goes, I'll give it a modest 2 vengeful Japanese onryos out of 5. But there's another question here. Does the pistol scare me in any way? Answer is yes, actually it kind of does. Because, like I said, Japanese Type 14s are quite fragile, and this is an irreplaceable, collectible piece of World War II memorabilia. And I would definitely not want something like this getting broken, especially with the firing pin situation these things are in. So I do my best to not handle this handgun, let alone shoot it, Yes, I know I have a box of ammo for it, and I even have replacement springs for it, but I just don't want to run that risk. And furthermore, upon doing research for this video, I found out another fact about this pistol that makes me even more terrified to handle and shoot it. I found out this is a stupidly rare early production Nagoya Chiguru pistol. I don't know if I pronounced that correct, so you can make fun of me all you want, but either way, this was made within the first 12 months of production. If you know anything about Nambu date stamps, you can tell this thing was made in October of 1927, so happy 98th birthday, little guy. The Nagoya mark is to the left of the date code and not the serial number, which is indicative of early models. There's 26 lines on the wooden grip panels, which, yes, that is an indicating feature, and there is no arrow marking above the safety lever, which I can tell why they added it later on, because look at the damn idiot mark on this handgun. So yeah, this thing's pretty damn neat and a lot more collectible than I thought it was. In fact, this may be the rarest gun in my entire collection, with a possible exception to the next gun we'll be talking about in just a moment. That explains why some guy at a gun shop offered to buy it off me, no questions asked, and did not elaborate why, so nice try.
Hey, Peter.
Sorry, Uncle Ben just got shot. I had to pay my respects. Anyway, this is my Walther K43, also known as the Carabiner 43, G43, Gewehr 43. They're all the same rifle, it's just a name change as the war progressed. However, the later designated K43s were made with more expedited manufacturing processes, so you can usually tell by looking at them if they're missing some features that the Germans deemed unnecessary. That's usually a telltale sign that you've got a later issued rifle like this one. This was made in 1945 at the Berlin-Lübecker Maschinenfabrik facility, and this is chambered an 8mm Mauser. The G43 and K43s are Germany's hastily thrown together answer to semi-automatic rifles being used by Americans and the Soviets. However, the Germans spent a little bit too much time dicking around with prototype rifles that, honestly had really unrealistic expectations, and they decided to just throw the towel in and copy the Soviet SVT-38 and SVT-40's gas system, and bada bing bada boom, you have the G43. Now, I don't know how well the camera is going to pick this up, so I'll run some B-roll of it, but this rifle actually has an interesting marking on the buttstock in the shape of a letter R. It's widely accepted, but not 100% confirmed, that this is a marking of the French border guard. So it's pretty interesting knowing that a German soldier took this rifle into France and didn't come back out. Now, of course, there's always room for speculation. This rifle could have simply been surrendered by a German soldier, but this is also World War II we're talking about here, so it's kind of up in the air. Now, I have a pretty good amount of military rifles in my collection, so it's a given that a few of them are going to have pretty dark backstories, but very few of them actually have evidence telling where it came from and where it ended up. So it's a pretty interesting little piece of information there. So aside from my personal rifle, K43s and G43s actually do have a bit of a dark backstory. So if you remember earlier, I mentioned the Germans basically expedited production of these and threw them out the door, copying the gas system from the Tokarev SVT-40. That's absolutely the case, and I want to make a note that it's very difficult to get semi-automatic rifles right, especially during World War II. So in order to guarantee these things functioned and nothing more on top of that, they made sure to drill these with giant gas ports so the rifles would absolutely function, but at the expense of them beating the absolute shit out of themselves with prolonged use. However, it's kind of grim, but the Germans decided that even though these rifles had this problem with a very short life expectancy, the German soldier carrying the rifle had an even shorter life expectancy, so they didn't see that as a problem, so they issued the rifles anyway. You can't imagine how comforting that must have been to hear, to be given one of these things and told exactly that as you headed out to the front lines. And another bit of dark, twisted history about the K43s and G43s is the fact that many of the rifles manufactured at the Gustavswerk facility specifically were made with forced POW and Jewish slave labor. And understandably, the laborers weren't happy about it, so they decided to sabotage a number of these rifles. But they had to do it in a way that wasn't detectable by the naked eye. So what they did was they simply did not drill gas ports into the barrels. So these rifles would be sent out the front door into frontline service, and the idea was if a German soldier took this rifle into combat and were suddenly ambushed by Allied soldiers, the German would be able to stand up and maybe get one shot off before he realized, oh no, shit, Scheiße, my rifle doesn't work, and ideally would get him killed in combat. Now, like I said, my rifle was manufactured at Berlin-Lübecker Maschinenfabrik, so I don't believe mine was made with forced labor, but this is Nazi Germany we're talking about here, so I wouldn't be surprised. But either way, for a spooky dark backstory, this rifle gets a pretty solid 3 out of 5 spooky German ghosts. And an obligatory follow-up, does this rifle scare me to this day? Yes. Yes, it does. Because I knew these rifles were unreliable. I knew they had a tendency to break themselves because they're really overgassed. Did I take that into account when I bought this thing? Yes and no. I decided, well, one box of ammo couldn't possibly hurt. It did. It hurt a lot. When I bought this, I took it to the range with one box of store-bought 8mm Mauser ammo, no spicy surplus shit, just regular 8mm Mauser. I fired 2 magazines through this thing, and in the final magazine, all of a sudden I had a dead trigger and I could hear rattling inside the receiver, which, yeah, that's not good. Not good at all. Turns out this thing did exactly what I feared it would. It absolutely beat the shit out of itself through prolonged use during the war, and it was on the absolute brink of internal breakage. And shooting it that one time was just enough to perfectly break the firing pin retaining unit in half. But thankfully I found a gunsmith who specializes in World War II German semi-automatic rifles. I was able to send the rifle to him, and he cleanly welded and mended the firing pin retainer back to where it was, to the point where you can't even tell it was broken anymore. And he also did me a solid by mending some of the hairline fractures that were starting to form in the back of the receiver. So of course, after the rifle was fixed, I ordered an aftermarket piston system, which is a non-permanent modification. You can easily swap it back if you want to, but it just ensures that the rifle will no longer be overgassed. And it's not really because I plan on shooting it a whole lot, but more or less because this is not going to be in my possession forever, obviously, and I just don't want whoever has this after me to make the same mistake. So if you have a G43 or K43, I strongly urge you to get an aftermarket piston kit if you plan on shooting it. So that being said, for scare factor, I'm giving it a solid 3 empty wallets out of 5. Taking a break from World War II stuff, this is my Ivor Johnson Model 50 Sidewinder. It's a 22 caliber, double or single action, 8-shot revolver. It's very unassuming and quite cheaply made, but this is a pistol that holds significance to myself and my family because this is an heirloom. But it's an heirloom that I've heard some pretty interesting stories about. So this revolver used to belong to my grandfather, and Grandpa lived a pretty secluded life in a small village up in northern Michigan, and throughout his lifetime he had experienced some pretty serious issues when it came to home invasions and burglaries in that particular area. On one occasion, several people at one time had broken into his home while he was away at work and completely ransacked the place and stole his snowmobile. And I bring that up because for Michiganders, there's a few lines you do not cross. Number 1 is don't take another man's hunting spot. Number 2 is never forget the Edmund Fitzgerald and give it a moment of silence every November. Number 3, don't touch another man's goddamn snowmobile. Some people are absolute savages. So after a few instances of theft and break-ins at his place, he had enough and he decided to contact the local sheriff and ask for advice. And the sheriff told him, go to Kmart and buy a gun. After that, it only took one more attempted break-in for that shit to stop immediately, because my grandpa once again was not home, but my grandma was with her 3 kids, my mom being one of them, and a burglar tried to break into the house while they were there. Grandma, being the badass she is, just took the revolver out of the leather holster draped over my grandpa's chair, pointed it out the window at him and said, if you take one step in this house, I'll blow your fucking head off. I have kids in here. Now, I know it's just a .22 revolver, but I don't think the guy's going to sit around and argue ballistics. He ran off and they never had the issue ever again. Now, the revolver would be put away for a while when I was growing up because obviously we didn't want this thing draped over a kitchen chair when there's little kids running around the cabin, but as I grew older and became of age, and by of age I mean like 12 years old, the revolver started rearing its head again. So when I started getting old enough to get into deer hunting, I would go up north to Grandpa's cabin with my uncles and my cousins, and they would go a couple of days before opening day of rifle season to get a few days of archery hunting in, which is something I wasn't into quite yet. So while everybody was out in the woods archery hunting, I'd just be alone in the cabin with Grandpa, and he would get bored, in which he would turn to me and say, Jay, I'm going to the bar. See that revolver hanging on the kitchen chair there? If anyone or anything, he had a bad black bear problem. If anyone or anything comes through that cabin door, I want you to unload all 8 shots into it, and I'll deal with it when I get home. I'm 12. Grandpa, what's a fat little chubby white kid gonna do with a .22 revolver if 5 meth heads break into the cabin? Or a black bear? Or 5 meth head black bears? Second of all, it is deer season. If anything does happen, I'm not using a .22 revolver. I've got an Ithaca 37 Featherlight loaded with slugs sitting upstairs under my bed, which I'm already on because I'm upstairs doing something that 12-year-old boys always do when they're alone. Oh, hey, Harry Palms, what a coincidence. So I thought about giving this thing a spooky score when I made this video, but honestly, it's actually kind of endearing. I think this pistol has actually done more than anything in my collection to ward away bad stuff than it actually invites in. So for the first time ever, I'm giving this a -1 spooky factor out of 5. But we're not out of the woods yet. Does the pistol scare me? Yes. This is probably the scariest gun in the list so far, and I'll tell you why. This pistol has really bad quality problems. In fact, the timing on this revolver is completely shot. If you look here, yeah, listen. The play in that cylinder is no joke. Timing is a term we use to describe how well the cylinder indexes to the barrel when you shoot the revolver. If the timing is out of spec, then the bullets aren't going to line up with the barrel. It's pretty simple. So eventually Grandpa passed away and left the pistol to me, and I took it to the range to enjoy it with a couple friends of mine, and after firing a few cylinders through this, I noticed immediately there was a really big fat problem here, because upon firing this revolver, I noticed that everybody suddenly got really worried and told me to stop shooting, in which I put the gun down and looked over and saw my friend holding up his bloodied arm. A fragment of a bullet actually shaved itself off and fired out the side of the cylinder because the timing is so bad on this revolver. So thankfully it wasn't a serious injury. He was able to just pluck the fragment out with his fingers. We washed it and put a band-aid on it. But yeah, I know you're probably watching this, my guy, and I'm sorry I kind of shot you a little bit. No hard feelings. So because this thing has actually caused bodily harm and will continue to do so until I fix it, yeah, this thing gets a solid 4 out of 5 punctured epidermises. So before we get to the last item on the list, I want to give a couple of honorable mentions. Guns that still are quite frightening to me for various reasons, but not necessarily because they have interesting backstories or anything like that. So let's just cut straight to the chase. First honorable mention, surprisingly, goes to my M1 carbine. This is actually an Alpine M1 carbine. It was among one of the first, if not the first, commercial carbines made entirely out of GI parts. In fact, the barrels are made from 03A3 Springfield barrels that are turned down and rechambered into 30 carbine, so that's pretty neat. I did not know this. I thought it was an authentic GI M1A1 carbine, thought I bought it for a steal at a gun show for $650, ran off to the range with a giddy attitude and loaded a 15-round magazine up, squeezed the trigger one time and realized, oh, I did not realize I bought an M2 carbine, if you catch my drift. So actually that was not the case. I just had an M1 carbine that was broken in a way where the disconnector no longer disconnected. Yeah, so I took one range trip with this thing and realized I had a big problem on my hands, so I needed to get that fixed right away because I did not want to know what the inside of a prism looked like. Thankfully, after a little bit of research, I was able to correct the problem, so yes, this rifle is now completely good to go, runs totally fine, and I'm very happy to own it. But for that first brief period that I had it, it was actually quite terrifying, and I'm surprised the dealer let me actually buy this thing without test firing it first. And the final honorable mention goes to my Mac 10. Yeah, it doesn't really look like a Mac 10, but there's a full video on this channel explaining why it's in this configuration. It's just a modern upper receiver, but the original lower is still intact. I would love to show you footage of it being shot, but unfortunately that's not allowed on YouTube. I had to learn that the hard way when the biggest video on my channel was instantly age restricted and demonetized. That hurt. That hurt a lot. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with this gun, of course. There's nothing about it that makes me fearful that it's going to hurt me when I shoot it, but just due to the fact that it's a machine gun introduces additional liability to it. Because let's be real, if you know somebody who has a machine gun, you definitely want to shoot it. And I'm glad to supply that experience with my close and strict supervision, might I add. That's very important. And if you're letting other people shoot your guns, I highly recommend you follow that. So let's be real, we're all very accustomed to just normal modern rifles like this AR here. Many people know how to shoot them, so it's pretty straightforward and makes people, kind of assume how firearms work, but that's not always the case. So just a brief recap here, if you want to run an AR, you take your magazine, you stick it in the rifle, you run the charging handle, and then you can shoot the rifle. But things like Mac 10s and older submachine guns of this nature are deceivingly simpler than that. However, you have to run it backwards, essentially. This functions on what's called an open bolt concept. So how you operate one of these is kind of the inverse of the AR I just showed you. So with no magazine in the firearm, you run the charging handle, and you see how it locked the bolt to the rear even though there's no magazine in it? That's because the bolt just catches on the trigger sear, and there's a firing pin welded to the front of the bolt. It's incredibly simple. So when I put the magazine in, now it's ready to go, and all you need to do is pull the trigger, and that bolt slams forward and scoops around off the magazine along the way, and then when it goes home, it punches the primer while simultaneously chambering the cartridge, and back pressure makes it fly to the rear, and it'll just keep shooting on fully automatic until you let go of the trigger or until it's out of ammo. That's about the best way I can explain it, so I hope that made sense. So this is why I'm very strict about close supervision when handling firearms, because there was an occasion where this quite literally saved my bacon. I was shooting this with a couple people I know and trust, so it's no fault to them. It's just, simple mistakes that can be preventable. But we were shooting this out in a 150-acre cedar swamp in the UP, and I gradually let everybody step their way up to full auto with a 30-round magazine. We started with dry firing, then single shots, then bursts, and eventually the full gambit. So one of the guys I was with had a full 30 round magazine loaded, and he had the time of his life just dumping this thing into a hill in the woods, and he ran out of ammunition. And he did the one thing that a lot of new shooters do, which is a terrible habit that I hope people learn to break, but he got so excited that he completely forgot the safety rules and went, haha, did you guys see that? So before the muzzle could fully sweep everybody behind him, I was able to grab the muzzle, redirect it, and it was no longer a problem. But the terrifying part of this was, we thought he fired a full 30 round magazine. He did not. He fired 29 rounds. So actually the gun was just dirty enough, kind of like this, where the bolt just caught on the feed lips of the magazine. And all it would have taken is taking this magazine out, and that bolt would have slammed forward, igniting the cartridge, and that would definitely ruin everybody's day. So if you happen to own one of these or get an opportunity to shoot one, just exercise extra caution and listen very closely to the person handing you the firearm. Now, last and certainly not least is something that returning viewers of the channel may recognize and may not be surprised by in this video. It is the trapdoor brez. It's a sawed-off trapdoor Springfield. What else can I say? Now, I made a video on this a few years ago, but it was more or less a tongue-in-cheek kind of joke video, but there's actually a lot more going on with this thing than I talked about previously. So a couple friends of mine found an online antique arms estate sale auction, and there's a bunch of antique firearms on there that were pretty interesting, and that's right up our alley, so we decided to go on there and peruse the lots. I saw this labeled as a Springfield 45 caliber pistol with only one shitty picture and no description. It was selling for like 325 bucks. Nobody else bid on it, so I figured, why the hell not? And well, I bought the pistol. I figured since this is a pre-1898 antique that I wouldn't have any issues and I could just have it in my house as a cool wall hanger that I don't really plan on shooting, but it got a lot more complicated from that point moving forward. So a quick bit of information, firearms manufactured before 1898 in the United States are not federally considered to be actual firearms. Therefore, they can be transferred straight to your house without the need of a federal 4473 form, at least on most occasions. Of course, there may be exceptions here and there, and I have one, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But during this auction, I also bought an Italian Carcano, which is not an 1898 or earlier antique. So I needed to do an FFL transfer, but for the sake of expediting the sale and getting things out the door, they went ahead and packaged both of these firearms together and sent them both to my FFL dealer. I thought it was a 6.5, but it's a 7.35. I can't even shoot this thing. So after the auction house sent the trapdoor brez with the Carcano to my FFL dealer, a couple of days later, I got a call from that same dealer. And I assumed the call would be something like, hey, your gun's here, come pick it up and do your paperwork and we'll be all set. That's not how it went. What happened was he called me and he said, hey, I got a package. What the f is this thing? What do I have here? I genuinely did not know there would be any problems. And I told him, well, I thought it was a pre-1898 antique. The auction house worked with an FFL dealer, so I thought it was good to go. Is there a problem, sir? And he was like, yeah, there is a problem because I don't really know how to classify this thing, so I need to do some research and I'll get back with you. Understandable. Totally fine. A couple hours later, he calls me again and he says, yeah, I couldn't figure it out. So I called the ATF. Immediate bubble guts. Like, butt water is starting to form inside my body. I did not know this would happen. I thought this was just going to be a simple, like, non-shooter wall hanger situation. I bought it because it looked cool. The end. So now I'm paralyzed in fear. I'm going to shit my pants eventually, and I need to know what the hell's going to happen. Am I going to learn what the inside of a prison looks like? So another few hours later, I'm at work, by the way, when this is happening, he calls me again and he says, well, the ATF couldn't figure it out either. They don't know what to classify this thing as, and they're concerned it might be an illegal short-barreled rifle. Yeah, the poop is flowing. It's coming out. The third floor window I work next to is looking really enticing at that moment. And I say, well, what are we going to do from this point? He goes, I don't know. They confiscated it and they're investigating this thing because they don't know what to do with this thing and more specifically what to do with me. And yeah, not good, bad, yucky, stinky, not just my underwear. So the next day, I did not sleep that night, by the way. The next day, he calls me back and he tells me, hey, I've got some good news for you. And I think, well, I've already written my will and testament, but I'll hear you out. He says, the ATF determined that it's legal to own. Thank God. And I'm like, great, I can continue living my life. What's the deal with it though? Like, how are they going to classify this? Turns out there's a very specific status of firearm called handgun manufactured from an antique, and that's what this is. It still has a 16.5-inch barrel, which makes it legal for rifle length, but because the stock is completely gone, it doesn't meet the overall length required for it to be a rifle. At least that's what I remember. I could be wrong. Bottom line is, they allowed me to keep it so long as I just did a 4473, and it's like, well, whatever. I'm not going to argue that. As long as I can get it home, I'm fine with it. So I did a 4473, and because I live in Michigan, I had to do a pistol sales record, which means I can legally conceal carry this thing now. So because this thing has given me undoubtedly pants-shitting level of paralysis and anxiety, I'm going to give it the full 5 soiled pair of boxers out of 5. So as far as backstory goes on this thing, I can say I did as much research as I possibly could, and I still could not find any answers. So if anybody is a trapdoor Springfield expert or just happens to know things about old firearms, I'd love to hear your theories about where the trapdoor barrels came from. I think the first and most likely explanation is this was just somebody's rifle and they dropped it and broke the buttstock off, and this was a quick and easy way to repair it and make it functional, just turning it into a pistol, and it seems to work just fine. The second most likely explanation, once again lower than the first one, is this might have possibly been a movie prop. I've heard of trapdoor Springfields being dressed up to look like more antiquated firearms for the sake of movie productions. Because for movies that were set in much earlier time periods than the 1870s, you may want something that looks like an actual black powdered musket, but you don't want the inconvenience that comes with it. If you're shooting a movie, you need to do several takes over and over again for the same scene, and it might be a pain in the ass to call for a break so everybody can get their ramrods out and load a front stuffer. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, it does give off oversized badass pirate pistol vibes, so wouldn't be surprised there. Now the third theory, and I want to give a big disclaimer here, absolute least possible of the three, but still kind of rattles around in my head sometimes, is maybe this is a firearm that was used as a holdout weapon by Native Americans. Like I said, totally grasping at straws here. Have no evidence to back this up, but it's just something I think might be possible because I have heard stories of Native Americans using captured weaponry and using them in their homes as holdout weapons, very much in the same spirit as the Russian Obrez pistol, where citizens would take Mosin-Nagant rifles off of the battlefield, saw them down to a pistol-sized firearm, and keep them hidden away to use in an emergency situation where occupying forces might invade their home. So once again, to completely cover my ass and not sound like I'm talking out of it, that's the least likely explanation. I really don't know where this came from exactly. So once again, if anybody out there knows anything about this, if it looks familiar to you, or maybe you've come across something similar to it, I'd love to hear about it. There have been actual trapdoor Springfield pistols manufactured in an official capacity, but there's like 4 of them, and they look nothing like this one. So your guess is as good as mine. So hey guys, thanks again for watching this video. I really hope you appreciated it. It totally was not thrown together at the last minute. It is October 28th when I'm filming this. You can ignore that. But hey, if you've got interesting guns in your collection that have spooky backstories like the ones I mentioned, or even better than the ones I mentioned, I'm sure there's plenty out there, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'd love to talk to you about it. So stay safe out there, happy Halloween, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
I was just wondering if you wanted to hang out with me and smoke weed while we fill our bellies with diet soda and play Burnout Revenge on the PS2. Are you in or are you out?
Burnout Revenge fucking sucks. I like Mario Kart Double Dash.
Wrong answer!
Oh, shit.